Good morning, everybody. Today we're talking fertilizers. So our goal for today is to go over the different components within a fertilizer, focusing on the macronutrients as well as looking at the different micronutrients that you might find in some different fertilizers. We're going to look at lawn fertilizers, vegetable fertilizers, and then all-purpose fertilizers that can be used in any type of landscape application. So stick around, and I hope you enjoy this video on fertilizers. Let's jump in, guys. All right, so here is my variety of fertilizers I have in front of us. So what we're going to focus on is taking a look at, the different types of fertilizers. I have fertilizers here for orchids, for vegetables, an all-purpose fertilizer, and a little bit of everything. But what I want to focus on first is the macronutrients within a fertilizer and kind of what that means, because those are the numbers that stand out the most. So in any fertilizer, off-the-shelf fertilizer that you purchase, they're going to have an NPK number: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And it's in that order always. So the first number is nitrogen, second number is phosphorus, and the third number is potassium. So if I was to look at this fertilizer right up front, this Pro Blend Orchid Food, it has a macronutrient number of 19,816. And that is a percentage of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium based on 100 pounds. So if I had my 19,816, for every 100 pounds of fertilizer, it would have 19 pounds of nitrogen, 8 pounds of phosphorus, and 16 pounds of potassium. All the other stuff in the fertilizers are going to be binders and additives to help dilute the fertilizer, make it more spreadable so you can apply it to your plants and so on. So of all of these fertilizers here, every single one of them is actually going to be a little bit different. So we see the one in the front, which is a 19,816. Then I have this Vigoro vegetable fertilizer. That is a 12,10,5. I have an all-purpose plant food, which is a 10,10,10. You can also find 16,16, so 16, 16, 16. And then here, this is actually an organic fertilizer, and organic fertilizers are really, really low in their numbers. And this one is actually only a 354. So nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, 354. So they're really, really low in their macronutrients. But that's because they're an organic fertilizer, and they're not going to have the same punch as a chemical fertilizer would. So, and then you can see this other all-purpose plant food here has a NPK number of 19,612. Okay, so those are our macronutrients: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. But plants do require other nutrients, and we call those micronutrients. So if I was to grab this tomato vegetable fertilizer from Vigoro, again, we see that it has a macronutrient of 12,10,5. But if I flip it over, and I actually took all the fertilizer out to make it easier to read, if I flip this over and we take a look at some of the micronutrients, we can see that it has some other stuff in there. There's some magnesium, some sulfur, some boron, some copper, iron, manganese, and these are all in really, really low quantities. So we have one that's 3%, 5%, 0.02%, 1%. Iron is the 1%. The manganese is 0.05%. So a lot of these fertilizers that we see, yes, they're going to have our macronutrients, but they're also going to have other ingredients in there to make it a complete fertilizer. And this fertilizer here is a complete fertilizer because it contains both the macro and the micronutrients. If we look at this 10,10,10 fertilizer here, and you can do this, just go to the store and flip the bag over and you can see all the components in there. If we look at this one, I'm going to flip it over, and this one still has some other ingredients in there. So this one has some boron, iron, calcium, and every fertilizer company is going to have a different blend, and there's no one perfect fertilizer. But what you do want is you want to look for a fertilizer that's a complete fertilizer. You don't want to be starving the plant for iron or for magnesium. Tomatoes, for example, require calcium, and they require calcium so that when the fruit, the tomato, is ready to set on the plant, the tomato doesn't get something called blossom end rot, and that's really common in tomatoes. And if you don't have that calcium in there, then you could have that as an issue. So those are the fertilizers. Another thing to take a look at when you're choosing your fertilizers is, are you getting a slow release fertilizer or are you getting a liquid fertilizer? So all of these except one are a slow release. This one right up here, this Orchid Mix, this is a liquid fertilizer, and even though it's a powder, you dilute it with water so that you can apply it to the plant. My personal preference is to use the slow release fertilizers, because when you dilute it in water and you water the plant, a lot of that fertilizer you just purchased is going right out of the bottom. It's you know, going down with the water as it drains through the plant. With slow release fertilizers, they stay on the surface, and then you can, every time you water, some of those nutrients are going to be released into the soil, okay? So there is some different all-purpose fertilizers. Next thing we're gonna take a look at is lawn fertilizer. Okay, so next we're gonna take a look at our lawn fertilizer, and what I have here is just a Scott's fertilizer. And if you go to the store to purchase some lawn fertilizer, sometimes it's a little overwhelming because there's a lot of different options. I decided to actually go with this particular Scott's fertilizer because in addition to having my nitrogen, my NP and K, it also has higher levels of iron. And iron is something that really helps give you that deep green grass that, you know, everyone's looking for. So you can actually purchase iron fertilizer, which is going to be real high in iron and low in the other nutrients, but this is a two-in-one, so it's a lawn food plus iron, and it's basically just, I can do both at the same time. Normally I would feed my lawn with just an all-purpose Scott's fertilizer. In the winter months you can actually get a winter blend, and then same thing for the summer months, they have summer blends. But typically I just use an all-purpose fertilizer, and I apply my lawn fertilizer about every month. So, and we'll go over how to apply fertilizers in a little bit. So for lawn fertilizer, lawns don't require a lot of P and K. They do require a lot of N. So if we were to look on the back of this bag, flip it over here, flatten it out. So on the back of this bag, you can see that this is a 2702. So it has no phosphorus and only 2% potassium. And then you can see it doesn't really have a lot of other ingredients. It has some sulfur, it has some iron, and it's actually 5% iron, so that's pretty high for a micronutrient. And that's it. So lawn fertilizer doesn't have a lot to it. But the reason it doesn't have a lot to it is because it doesn't have flowers. So that third number, the K, NPK, the potassium, is really, really beneficial for fruit and flower set. So the reason there's almost nothing in lawn fertilizer is because it doesn't flower. For the middle number, the phosphorus, there's enough available phosphorus in the soil naturally occurring in most instances where you wouldn't even need that. And a lot of fertilizers you're seeing less and less or almost zero phosphorus because this is a cause for runoff or for pollution. So fertilizer companies are using less phosphorus in their fertilizer mixes, especially for lawns, because of that potential for runoff. And phosphorus sticks in the ground forever, so we don't really need to keep applying it. That's different when we talk about nitrogen, because nitrogen does leach through the soil, so that means it works its way through the soil and becomes less available to the plant. So you want to use more nitrogen when you're applying your lawn fertilizers, okay? So I did fertilize about a month ago on my grass, and I'm actually due for another fertilizer, but I am going to be applying some fertilizer today, and in my next video we'll go over how to do some spot treatment, okay? So stick around and let's see how we apply fertilizers. All right, so here I am back at my garden. If you remember from our last video, we installed our drip irrigation system, and it's doing well. The squash have exploded since the last time I made a video. Tomatoes are quite a bit larger, and what I want to do right now is actually fertilize these plants. So I'm going to be using a slow release fertilizer, and I'm going to use this stuff right here, my Triple 10 all-purpose plant food. And I like the Triple 10 because vegetables do require all three: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, as well as the micronutrients. For my tomatoes specifically, I usually add a little extra tomato food to them because it provides that calcium that they need. So if we, I'm gonna open my bag of fertilizer here. And you can see it's a granule. It has different components in it. And basically when I apply this stuff, I'm gonna go around to each one of my plants, and I wanna just put some of that fertilizer around the base of each plant. I wanna really pay close attention that I'm not getting the fertilizer on the leaves, because as the sun comes out and if I have that fertilizer on the leaves, it's gonna cause damage to the leaves, and I don't want that to happen. So I'm just gonna put a small amount around each plant, and then I'm good. I'm good for probably a few weeks or a month or so until I need to apply again. So that's all there is to it, to applying a slow release chemical fertilizer. It's kind of like a once and done thing. You throw it down there and then hit it again a couple weeks later. So that is the application of slow release. Okay, so the last thing I want to show you is applying lawn fertilizer. So this is something I do just about every single month, and I try to stay pretty frequent with my fertilizer application for my lawn so that I can make sure my roots are healthy and strong, I'm not overwatering, and my grass stays nice and green. You can see a few brown patches here, and that is from my dog, and that's going to be our next video, is doing some spot treatment. But for the most part, I have a really healthy lawn. When you fertilize, it promotes root growth and development. It actually helps to cut back on the amount of water you're applying, and it just keeps your lawn looking fresh throughout the summer months when it gets real hot. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the fertilizer that I showed you, this Scott's fertilizer with iron, and I'm going to be using a broadcast spreader. So this is a broadcast spreader. A couple of the key features on it is it has this handle here, and this handle operates this gate, and that gate is what allows the fertilizer to drop down into a spreader that spins and broadcasts the fertilizer. It also has a dial where you can adjust the amount of fertilizer that's dropping down and being broadcast. And every single lawn fertilizer is going to have an application rate. So look on the packaging somewhere. It'll tell you what to set your spreader to, and that's what you're gonna wanna use. I'm gonna say the rule of thumb is it's always better to go a little bit light on your fertilizer than too heavy. The worst thing you could do is apply too much fertilizer and then burn your lawn, and then your beautiful green grass will look brown and yellow, and it'll take a long time to come back. So another important tip, especially if you're doing this at your home or for a customer, is when you apply your fertilizer, you want to be cautious of where you're actually filling it up. So right now I'm on a concrete patio, and if I was to spill some of my fertilizer, because it has iron in it, if I was to spill it on the concrete, if I got that wet or didn't hose it off right away completely, it's gonna leave rust marks on the ground because the iron's gonna rust. Same thing if I was to apply the fertilizer in the grass. If I accidentally spilt some fertilizer, then I'm gonna have a really concentrated spot of fertilizer, and that's gonna cause a dead spot in the grass. So try to do it somewhere neutral, maybe in a planter. I have an area that has some bark, some decorative bark in this garden. So that's probably where I'll walk over to fill up my broadcast spreader. And then I'm gonna get that filled up, and then we're gonna fertilize the grass. So stick around. All right, so I've got my my broadcast spreader filled up with the fertilizer, and what I need to do now is I need to get this fertilizer applied. So I want to be pretty precise when I'm walking back and forth. I don't want to overlap my lines too much, because then I'm gonna have too much fertilizer on specific strips where it's overlapping. So I just want to pay attention to where I'm walking, how I'm applying it, and my goal is to have an even application of this slow release fertilizer throughout my whole lawn, okay? So I'm gonna just grab my spreader, pull down on my crank, and I'm gonna fertilize. And you can see the amount that's coming out of the spreader, and then I'm gonna stop when I get to the edge, move. You can see some of those brown spots we got to fix, and then I'm going to continue. And I'm walking at a pretty quick pace, and I'm making sure that I'm not overlapping the areas. All right, so that is basically how I apply my lawn fertilizer. Well, everyone, that's it. That's how we analyze, take a look at a fertilizer bag. I showed you how we apply a chemical fertilizer to some vegetables, as well as the grass. So the final step is, once I got all my fertilizer laid down, I want to water. And the reason I want to water my lawn is so that I don't have any of those fertilizer granules just sitting on the blades of grass. If I was to let them sit on the blades of grass, the sun's gonna beat down on the grass, and that's gonna cause some burning to the grass. And the last thing I want to do is add any more brown spots to my grass, because I already have enough for my darn dog. Like, there's one right there at the bottom of the screen, adding those brown spots to my grass. So I'm trying to do everything to prevent the brown spots. I got my sprinklers going. I got a great little rainbow there in the background. And you know what? Thank you guys for joining in, and hopefully you got some useful information on fertilizers. And stay tuned for more videos. Don't forget to like and subscribe, everybody. Have a great day. Bye.